Hey everyone, so today I thought I'd make a video talking about sword safety guidelines that I use and also I get my friends to do when they come over for training. And we do this whenever we're using a sharp sword for Tameshigiri and also for sword training. So you can't see the shorts that I'm wearing, but they actually have a small cut on them. And that came about more than a year ago when I first started training with sharp swords. And back then I had a near miss where I cut through my shorts, and thankfully I didn't cut myself or hurt myself, but I very well could have, and it could have gone quite wrong. So before that I had this very common sense approach to sword safety. You know, if it sounds stupid or you think it might be stupid, then don't do it. And it worked pretty well for quite some time, but then I realized that a moment of carelessness can make that whole thing go wrong. And so I started implementing these active guidelines that I actually thought about, and I recommend that you do the same as well, because once when you actually think about it, you can have quite solid guidelines that you can follow, and that way then you know that you're safe. And it becomes a routine and a habit, so that even in carelessness, tiredness, you're not going to break it down. So these are the guidelines that I do for myself, and when my friends come over, then I get them to follow these guidelines as well. Because sword safety is not a joke. You know, a lot of people like to swing their swords around and look really cool and flashy, but if they're not safe, then it's just stupid. So for you guys, please stay safe. And I'll run you through my 8 quick rules and 8 quick guidelines that I hold. So the first one is called don't know, don't do. And it means if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. So if it's a new technique, something you haven't learned, you haven't done before, then don't do it without supervision. Supervision may be your master at your dojo, you know, someone else who has done it and can walk you through it. Or if you don't have that available, it might even just be online learning, watching a few videos and running it through in your head until you have a solid idea and you can run through the whole process in your mind before you even touch the sword. Now, the other part of don't know, don't do is that if you have any questions about, oh, is this stupid? Will this be a bad idea? Don't do it. Now the second rule is Bokken First. So a Bokken is a wooden sword, and for any new forms, any new techniques, then always use a blunt wooden sword first, and do it slowly, because that way then if there's any mistakes, then it happens with a Bokken. And you know, in the past in training, I've hit myself with a Bokken. And it's better with a Bokken than with a live sword, because I probably wouldn't have a leg if I had done it with a live sword. Now this follows on from the first rule, so after you've received supervision, then use a Bokken. Now the third rule is distance. So I always like to have arm's length plus 1.5 times the blade length of the sword away from everything. So that's walls, ceiling, other people coming into contact with you. So that way then you can't hit anything. You can't hit the wall and you can't hit someone else and hurt them. And the thing is, sometimes then people walk into range while you're doing your cutting. If that happens, I just stop and I tell them, you're too close, take a step back please. Now the next 2 apply for when you're actually doing Tameshigiri cuts. And the fourth one is called cut with confidence. So what that means is when you go for that cut, you should be confident that you can cut through the target with that technique. Now, you know, it doesn't mean that you have to, but my martial arts background is in Taekwondo. And in Taekwondo then I used to do a lot of board breaks, and we didn't do board breaks on those really flimsy, thin demonstration boards. We did them on, you know, 1/2 inch thick boards of pine, sometimes more than that. Sometimes then they were even up to 2 centimeters thick. And my master always told me, if you're not confident that you can kick through it, then don't kick through it. Just stop, run it through in your head and build up that confidence until you can, and you've run through the technique in your mind, and then unleash the technique. Now the reason why is because uncertain movements in martial arts can cause accidents. If you're unsure of your cut, then your grip might be loose and the sword might fly out of your hand. And if you're unsure of the cut, then your acceleration might be odd because you're always wanting to be able to pull backwards, and then you might have a really weird cut and your sword path might not go great and you might hurt yourself or somebody else. So if you're unsure, then just wait there. You know, don't swing around a sword if you're not sure that you can cut through it. Now the fifth one is cut away from the lead leg. So for instance, if I've got my right foot forward, then I want my downward cuts to go to the left, and I want my rising cuts to go to the right, so that the sword path never crosses my leg. Now what I don't want to be doing is cutting this way or this way, because then my knee is in the way. Now once when you get more experience, then you can break this rule, because you'll have a good idea of your sword path. But also every time when you have a new sword, then get some time to familiarize yourself with the sword, because the last thing you want is your knee to be cut off. And so you'll often see me do my rising cuts from the same side as the lead leg, but when I train with my friends who are less experienced, I always tell them to do the rising cuts the other way. Now the sixth one is called handle first, and it means when you're passing the sword to somebody, then don't go, oh yeah, here's the sword, because the blade is up, it could get into someone's eye, could hit someone, it's rather dangerous. So instead, hold the handle up, blade down, and say, here's the sword. And don't point it back at yourself, point it to the side, so that even if they grab it and it moves, it's not going to hit you, and they can take the sword safely and take it away from you. It also applies to when you're walking around with a sword, then blade down, handle up and close to your body, and walk like this, because if you're walking around with your sword like this, or even like this, then it's sticking out, you can hurt someone who's not paying attention and not aware. Now even better yet is resheathe the sword and hand it to somebody in its sheath. But there's a reason why you might not want to do that, and I'll go through that next. So the next one is unsheathe and resheathe yourself. Unsheathing and resheathing are the most dangerous times of using a sword for self-injury, because you can hurt your left hand if you don't unsheathe and resheathe properly, because the sword can cut it. So if you're untrained, then especially for friends and the like, then unsheath it and resheathe it for them. So get them to hand you the sword, and you can unsheath it and hand it to them, and then when they're done with it, then get them to hand the sword back and you resheathe it, because you don't want them to cut the webbing of their hand. The other thing is, just not just for their safety, but also for the safety of your scabbard, then unsheathing and resheathing can damage your scabbard. So it's your sword, so you can take care of it better than they will, and so you should resheathe and unsheath it yourself. Now if you have a trained friend who has their own swords and knows how to keep them and unsheath and resheath, then they can do it, but it's more for untrained friends and beginners. Now the last one is called sacrifice for safety. Now this means that safety is number one. Everything else comes under that. So you can sacrifice training, mastery of techniques, and cool points, because safety is more important. Training, you'll always have time to train. If you're too tired, if you've had alcohol, don't train. Mastery of a technique, if you keep on pushing it and you're not sure of it, then you're more likely to injure yourself and you'll never master the technique than if you just say, I'll go through it slowly, I'll take my time, and eventually I'll master it. And the last one, cool points, it may look cool that you're swinging around a sword and spinning it around, but if you hurt yourself, it's not a good look. It doesn't look cool and it's not worth it. So safety first, guys. So sword mistakes are very rare. You don't hear about them that often compared to the number of people who train with swords. But when they do happen, then they are catastrophic. So mistakes can be very, very serious when using a sword, so safety must be paramount. So please actively think about your sword safety guidelines. You don't have to use mine. In fact, I encourage you to make your own that work for you, because the common sense approach is, it's not bad, but it's not good enough, because if you have a moment of carelessness, you're tired, you've been training for a while, and it just slips your mind, then if you haven't actively thought of these situations, then you might have an accident, and it's not worth the risk. So please stay safe, come up with your own sword guidelines, and with that, I'll see you next time.